What would you do if a simple DNA test rewrote your entire life? How do you process learning that your adoptive parents cut you out of their estate, while a law firm tells you that you're the only legitimate heir of a billionaire industrialist? This outline follows the story of a quiet, underestimated man who discovers the truth behind the unusual circumstances of his adoption. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Martin Hale. I am 49 years old, and for most of my life, I was sure I was the extra person at every table I sat at. I live alone in a small townhouse on the edge of the city. The kitchen is narrow, the ceiling light hums, and the fridge door sticks if you do not pull it just right. It is quiet most mornings. The only sound is the kettle and the buzz of my phone on the table. That morning, my phone lay face up beside my coffee mug. The family group chat lit up with messages. My younger sister Laura was sending photos from my parents' house. She was talking about new curtains, new flooring, and how nice it would be when they finally handed everything down to the kids. By kids, she meant herself and our brother Connor. She always used that word like I was not counted. I scrolled through the messages and saw my own name only once. Connor wrote that he hoped my schedule would allow me to attend the next family dinner and that it would be nice if I could help move some furniture. There was a smiling emoji after that line. My mother answered that it would be good to see me, and my father sent a thumbs up. Nobody asked how I was. It had been like that for years. At 29, my parents told me I was adopted. They did it at that same dining table I still visit, between the main course and dessert on a Sunday. They said they had always meant to tell me, but they were afraid I would feel hurt. My father added that I should see this as proof that they chose me. My mother said that things would not change. 10 minutes later, they explained that their will had been updated and that the house and the estate would go to their own children, meaning Connor and Laura. They said I should understand. They said bloodlines mattered for certain legal things. I remember nodding and saying that I understood because I did not trust my voice. I finished my coffee in the quiet of my kitchen and closed the group chat. I had learned to look at their messages like I was watching a show that did not invite me on stage. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a single line from my mother. She reminded me of Sunday dinner. She said they were counting on me for help with the heavy dishes and chairs. I tapped a short answer and told her I would be there. Their house always looks the same when I pull into the driveway. The paint is a little faded now, but the lawn is trimmed and the porch light is always on, even during the day. I parked behind Connor's shiny SUV. The license plate has his initials and a number that he says is important to his business brand. I got out of my old sedan and walked to the front door with a bottle of wine in my hand that I knew my parents would not open. Inside, the smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the hallway. My mother called out from the kitchen that I should take my shoes off. She does not say hello anymore. She just gives instructions. I stepped into the dining room carrying a tray from the counter like she asked. Connor and Laura were already there, standing near the table and talking over the seating plan. When they saw me, they gave quick nods as if a neighbor had dropped by. Connor clapped me on the shoulder and said I was just in time to help with the chairs. He laughed and added that this was a clear sign that I was still useful for manual work. He said it in a playful tone, but he looked at Laura as he spoke, and she smiled. My mother said I had always been good at lifting things, and my father said it was nice that I did not have children because it made my schedule flexible for the family. Everyone laughed softly, and I smiled because it seemed easier. The guests that night were my parents' friends from their church and golf club. They were people who had known me since I was little. They greeted Connor and Laura with big hugs, asked about their kids, and talked about their jobs. When they turned to me, they shook my hand and asked how work was in that careful way you use when you talk to someone you do not know well. If I gave any detail at all beyond fine, their eyes slid away towards someone more interesting. Dinner started with a toast. My father stood up, raised his glass, and said he wanted to speak about family. He talked about how proud he was of his children. He listed Connor's successful business and Laura's well-behaved kids and her big house. He talked about how happy he was to know that everything he and my mother had built would be in good hands when they were gone. When he said good hands, he looked at Connor and Laura. My name did not come up in that speech. People clapped. Then someone at the table asked about me. It was my father's old neighbor, a man who still remembered when I helped him fix his fence as a teenager. He asked if I still worked at the same factory. I explained that I worked as a manufacturing engineer now, that I had designed a system that reduced waste and saved the company money. Before I could finish, Connor cut in and told the table that I was always good with machines, and that it was nice I had something to do. He said it in a way that made it sound like a little hobby. Laura added that it was good I had a steady job, since I did not have a family to fall back on. She said some people were not meant for the stress of kids and big careers. She told the table that it was still important to feel useful. She did not look at me when she said it, but everyone else did. I felt my face grow hot for a moment. Then the feeling passed. I took a sip of water and listened as the conversation moved away from me, back to Connor's latest project and Laura's youngest child's school. My mother reached over and asked if I could pass the bread. She did not notice that my hands shook slightly. After dinner, as we cleared the table, my mother leaned close and told me quietly that I should not take things so seriously. She said Connor and Laura had a lot on their shoulders with the future of the house and the estate. She said that I should feel relieved that I did not have to worry about those things. She called me dear, but her voice sounded tired. I stayed to wash dishes because that is what I always do. While I stood at the sink, Connor walked in and leaned against the counter. He said he hoped I was not upset about my father's speech. He said the speech was really for the guests, for appearances, and that I should know my place by now. He added that I had been lucky to be brought into the family at all. It was the first time he had said it that directly. I told him that I understood and kept my hands in the warm water. He shrugged and said he was glad I was reasonable. Then he left the room, whistling as he walked away. On my way out later, my mother pressed a container of leftovers into my hands and said I should not forget to refill the gas in their backup generator next weekend. My father shook my hand and thanked me again for helping out. Connor stood in the hallway with his arms crossed, joking with Laura about a holiday that they were planning together. Nobody asked when I would like to see them next. I stepped out into the cool night air and closed the door behind me. Driving home, I watched the lights of other people's houses flash past in the dark. Some windows were open, and I could see families inside at their tables, talking, arguing, laughing. I tried not to picture myself at ours. I had done that for too long. At some point, you stop expecting anything different. When I reached my townhouse, the street was quiet. I parked, locked the car, and carried the leftovers inside. The kitchen light hummed when I flipped the switch. I put the container in the fridge and stood in the middle of the room for a moment, listening to nothing. There is a frame on the wall beside my table that holds an old photo my mother gave me years ago. It shows my parents, Connor and Laura, standing in front of their first house. I am not in the picture. I was not in their lives yet. She said she gave it to me because it was the year everything started. I used to think she meant the year they became a family. Later, after I learned about the adoption, I understood that she meant something else. I sat down at the table and opened my phone. There were more messages in the family chat. Photos from dinner, a short video of my father's toast, only the part where he talked about Connor and Laura. Someone had added little heart icons on top. Connor had written a comment saying this was the future of the Heir legacy. Laura had answered with a line about keeping traditions strong. No one had tagged me. I was about to put the phone face down when it vibrated again. This time it was not the group chat. It was a call from an unknown number. The screen showed a city code I did not recognize. I watched it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed once more with a notification that said there was a new voicemail. I did not listen to it right away. I just sat there in the hum of the kitchen light, looking at the missed call icon, without knowing that this was the moment things began to change. The voicemail waited on my phone until the next morning. I slept badly. I woke up before sunrise and went down to the garage, like I often do when my mind will not settle. The garage is my space. There is a workbench under a small window, jars of screws, old tools lined up in a way only I notice. I turned on the radio to low volume and stood there for a while, just listening to the hum. My phone lay on the workbench, screen dark. I picked it up and opened the voicemail icon. A calm woman's voice filled the small room. She said she was calling from a law firm, gave a name I did not know, and said they wanted to speak with me about a private matter concerning my background. She used careful words like personal history and possible inheritance review. She asked me to call back and repeated the number. I listened twice. The law firm name sounded real, not like a scam message. Still, it felt distant, almost like it was meant for someone else. I saved the voicemail and put the phone face down on the bench. I told myself I would look into it later. Then I reached for a rag and started wiping dust off an old wrench. When my hands are busy, my mind goes back in time on its own. It went straight to the day my parents told me I was adopted. I was 29 then. I had come over for Sunday lunch like always. My mother made roast chicken with all the sides. My father poured wine. Everything seemed normal. We finished eating, and they asked me to stay at the table while Laura and Connor went into the living room with the guests. My mother folded her hands and said they needed to share something important. She told me that I was adopted. She spoke like she was explaining a business decision, not a family secret. She said they had always meant to tell me earlier, but time passed and it became harder to start. My father added that they had chosen me carefully, that it proved they wanted me. He said that part with a proud smile, like he expected me to feel honored. I remember staring at the pattern on the tablecloth and thinking that suddenly my whole childhood had a strange echo. Little things started lining up in my mind. The times distant relatives had said I did not take after anyone. The way people looked surprised when they learned I was the oldest, not the middle child. The moments when my mother corrected strangers and called me our oldest, with a small pause before the words. Before I could ask any real questions, my father cleared his throat and said there was more. He explained that he and my mother had updated their will. He said that the house, their savings, and the land they owned would pass to Connor and Laura. He called it keeping the estate in the bloodline. My mother said there were legal reasons and that it would be complicated otherwise. They both looked at me like I should understand and accept it. I asked if they had decided this recently. My mother said they had always planned it this way and that I should not feel hurt, because I had been given a home, a name, and an education. My father told me I should see it as fair. He said they would help me in other ways if I ever needed it. I said I understood. I always say that. It is easier than asking why. Later that year, my parents hosted a small gathering to celebrate their estate planning. They never used the word will in public. Connor joked loudly about how big a job it would be to manage all the property one day. Laura talked about where she might put a pool when the house became hers. They did not look at me when they made these plans. If any guest asked what would happen to me, my mother said I was very capable on my own. My childhood looks different when I look back from that day. I was the kid who shared a room with Connor even when there was a spare room. My parents said it would be good for boys to learn to share. When Laura wanted her own room at 12, they repainted the guest room and bought her a new bed in a week. When school trips had extra costs, my permission slips went to the bottom of the pile. If there was money left, I went. If not, I stayed home. It was not all cruel. They never starved me. There were birthday cakes and Christmas gifts, but there was always a thin gap, like glass, between me and the rest of them. They did not use words like adopted child. They used softer ones like our special one, which sounds kind until you realize it means you are marked as separate. When I finished high school, I was offered a place in a university engineering program. I remember being proud. My father said it was great but expensive. He suggested I consider the local technical college instead. He said that was more practical for someone like me. They paid for part of it and called the rest a loan I should pay back when I started working. When Connor got into business school out of state, they sold some investments to cover his tuition. They told him it was important to invest in the next generation of leadership. I went to technical college, I studied hard, I found part-time work. I paid back their loan right on schedule. Nobody mentioned it after that. The radio in the garage drifted from music to news. I turned it down and set the rag aside. The wrench was clean. My mind had run the full circle again. It always lands in the same place. I was grateful and invisible at the same time. At lunchtime, I drove to the plant. I have worked there for years now, in a big gray building with bright safety lines painted on the floor. The break room smells like coffee and microwaved food. The vending machine hums in the corner. I sat at a table with my plastic container of leftovers from my parents' dinner. Two younger engineers sat at the next table. They talked about some new project and a promotion one of them hoped to get. They did not notice me at first. When they did, one of them nodded and said I was the guy who knew everything about the old machines. He said the supervisor called me Steady Martin. He meant it as a compliment, but then he laughed and added that I would probably die at that plant because I never made any noise about going higher. My supervisor came in and asked the room if anyone wanted to volunteer for overtime on Saturday to fix a layout issue. He did not look in my direction. He just wrote my name on the list and said I was always willing. The others glanced at me. I shrugged and ate my food. It is hard to complain when you have trained everyone to expect your silence. After my shift, I did not want to go straight home. I drove to the public park instead. There is a walking trail that circles a small lake. In autumn, the trees around it turn gold and red. People walk dogs, push strollers, or sit on benches with paper cups from the cafe nearby. I like to walk there and let my thoughts stretch out in a place that does not belong to anyone. As I walked, I thought about the will again. I imagined my parents' house, the garden my mother loves, the shed I painted twice. I pictured Connor standing in the yard one day, telling some neighbor that his parents had left him everything. I wondered if he would mention my name. I doubted it. I tried to tell myself that it did not matter. A house is bricks and wood, land is dirt. I have my own life, my own small place. But there is a part of you that notices when people tell you, very casually, that your place in the story stops at the edge of the picture frame. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out. It was the same unknown number from the night before. The name of the law firm showed on the screen this time. I watched it ring, thumb hovering above the answer button. My heart beat a little faster for reasons I could not name. I did not pick up. The call went to voicemail again. A few seconds later, a text appeared. The message was polite. It said they had been trying to reach me regarding a matter connected to my biological family background. It said they understood I might be cautious, but that it was important we speak. It asked me to call at my convenience. I read the text twice as I walked. The firm name still sounded familiar, like I had seen it on a building downtown. I considered searching it on my phone, but slipped it back into my pocket instead. I wanted to be on solid ground when I did that, back in my own house, within my own four walls. The sun was low by the time I got home. The kitchen light hummed like always when I switched it on. I warmed up some soup, ate standing at the counter, then moved into the small room I call my office. It is really just a spare room with a desk and a filing cabinet, but it is where I keep my papers. The filing cabinet is old metal with drawers that stick if you pull too fast. I have folders for work contracts, tax returns, car documents, and in the bottom drawer, there is a small group of items my mother gave me 10 years ago in a thin envelope. She said they were things from when we brought you home, and that I might want them someday. I had looked at them once and then pushed them to the back. I knelt down and opened the bottom drawer. The metal squealed a little. Inside, near the back, was that same envelope, yellowed at the edges. Behind it, I noticed a thicker folder I did not remember seeing before. The label on the tab was written in my father's neat, sharp handwriting. It said, Adoption Records, 1974. The folder label stopped me. The letters were written in dark blue ink, neat and straight, the way my father wrote when he filled out forms or signed checks. Adoption Records, 1974. My birth year. My fingers rested on the cardboard edge for a moment. The room felt smaller all at once, like the walls had leaned in. I pulled the folder out and set it on the desk. The cardboard was heavier than the other files, a little bent at the corners. For a second, I just looked at it. This thing had been sitting in my house while I went to work, paid bills, and smiled through family dinners. Someone had decided it belonged here with me and then never mentioned it again. I did not open it. Instead, I reached for the thin envelope my mother had given me years ago. It lay beside the folder. The flap was creased from when I had opened it once, a long time ago, then closed it quickly. I slid out the contents now and spread them on the desk. There was a copy of a birth certificate with my name handwritten in careful script. The space for mother had a name I did not know. The space for father was blank. There was a small card from a hospital with my weight and length, and there was a faded brochure from an adoption agency. The logo showed two hands cradling a small house. The agency name was printed in a style that looked dated from another decade. In the bottom corner of the brochure, there was a seal stamped in purple ink. It had a different name, not the agency itself. It looked like the name of a law office or a trust. The letters were hard to read, but one word stood out. Blaine. The name meant nothing to me then. It was just another word on a page that smelled like old paper and dust. I ran my thumb over the seal. The ink had bled slightly into the paper fibers. It had been there a long time. I tucked the papers back into the envelope and slid it into the folder without looking at the other documents inside. I was not ready. I closed the folder, put it back in the drawer, and shut the cabinet. The metal rang softly, like a small bell. I stood up, turned off the light in the office, and went to bed. A few days later, my mother reminded me about another family dinner. This time it was smaller, just immediate family. The message said there were things to discuss. That was the phrase she used. It sounded official and vague at the same time. I drove to their house on a Thursday evening. The sun was low. The front yard looked trimmed and proper, as always. Inside, the dining table was already set. Connor and Laura stood near the kitchen, glasses in hand. My parents moved around each other in a quiet dance, passing dishes, checking the oven, adjusting napkins. I greeted them all. My father nodded. My mother kissed my cheek in a quick motion that felt like habit more than affection. Connor told me I looked tired. Laura said she hoped my work was not too overwhelming, in the tone you use for someone who stacks shelves part-time. We sat at the table. My mother asked me to carve the meat. She always does. She says I have steady hands. Connor poured wine for everyone except me. He said he remembered I had to drive back to the far side of town, even though my place is not that far. Dinner conversation started with safe topics. Weather, local news, Laura's children's activities, Connor's business deals. My parents listened with interest, asking follow-up questions, laughing at small stories. When someone asked about my week, I started to mention a project I had been leading at the plant, but Connor cut in joking that I was trying to talk about machines again and that their eyes would glaze over. Everyone chuckled. The subject changed. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. He said there were a few family matters to go over. He used the same phrase my mother had used in her message. He spoke about updating some documents, making sure everyone knew what to expect for the future. Laura leaned over and squeezed my mother's hand, smiling. Connor sat back with the look of someone who already knows the punchline. My father talked about the house, the savings, the investments. It was nothing I had not heard before, but this time he went into small detail. He mentioned which parts would go to Connor, which to Laura. He used phrases like keeping things in the direct line. He talked about responsibility, about tradition. He did not look at me. At the end, Laura raised her glass and said a few words about being proud to carry the family name forward. She mentioned that her kids were excited to know that their grandparents' house would stay in the family. She joked that they already call the guest room their future room. Her oldest child, who was sitting at the end of the table with a tablet, laughed and said they always think of this as Mom and Uncle Connor's house one day. Laura corrected them gently and said they meant Mom and Uncle Connor's family house. Then she added that they sometimes forget to list me because I am busy in my own world. Everyone smiled. No one thought it sounded cruel. Later, when dessert was served, Laura made another small comment. She said her children do not really see me as an uncle because I am more like a quiet friend of the family who helps out. She said it like it was a funny little observation from a child. My mother laughed and said kids say the most honest things. I did not laugh. I kept my eyes on my plate, on the neat slice of cake that tasted like nothing. Inside, something settled. It was not anger. It was like a weight that finally decided where to sit. After dinner, we moved to the living room. My parents showed Connor and Laura a new framed family photo they had ordered from a photographer. It was from a gathering last year. It showed my parents sitting on a bench, Connor and Laura standing behind them with their spouses and children grouped around them. I was not in it. My mother explained that the photographer had focused on the grandkids and their parents. She said there would be other pictures that might include me. She said it so casually that it felt rehearsed. Connor joked that it looked like the cover of some magazine, a proper family legacy shot, he called it. My father suggested taking another photo in the backyard before it got dark. Everyone went outside except me. I stayed behind to help my mother carry some dishes. She did not ask me to join the picture. Through the window, I could see them arranging themselves on the lawn. The kids squirmed. Connor checked his hair in the reflection of the glass door. Laura smoothed her dress. My father slipped his arm around my mother's waist. The photographer lifted the camera. I watched through the glass as the flash went off. The image froze for a second in my mind. My family standing together. Me inside, holding a stack of plates. After they were done, Connor came back into the kitchen. He told me they had captured the next generation lineup. He said I should see it as a good thing that I did not have to worry about any of this. He used that same word again. Lucky. When I drove home that night, I did not turn on the radio. The car was quiet. I could still see the group outside on the lawn every time I blinked. For years I had swallowed small cuts like that and told myself they were accidental. Tonight, I believed them. At home, I went straight to the office. I turned on the light and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The folder was still there where I had left it. Adoption Records, 1974. I took it out and placed it on the desk. This time I opened it. I will not list everything I saw. The details themselves are less important here than the feeling they left. Letters between offices, notes in margins by hands I did not know, dates, signatures, the name of the adoption agency. The same seal with Blaine stamped into purple ink, but clearer this time, joined by other words I did not yet understand. There were references to a trust, to instructions, to confidentiality. My parents' names appeared on several pages, written out in full. They were attached to phrases about agreement and compensation. There was also a line about original parentage being unavailable to the adoptive family unless certain conditions changed. Someone had underlined that line long ago. I read enough to know that my arrival in their house had been more complicated than the simple story they once told me. I closed the folder carefully and sat back. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. For the first time, I wondered if my parents knew more than they had ever said about where I came from and why they had taken me in. The next morning, on my break at work, I finally called the law firm. I went outside to the parking lot. The sky was gray. Trucks rumbled past on the road. I leaned against my car and dialed the number from the voicemail. A receptionist answered, polite and neutral. When I gave my name, there was a pause. She said 1 moment and that someone had been expecting my call. After a short wait, another voice came on. It was a woman, older with a steady tone. She introduced herself as Harriet Boyd. She said she was a senior partner at the firm. She thanked me for returning the call. Then she asked if I had a few minutes to speak privately. I said I did. She asked if I was aware of any information regarding my biological parents. I told her only what I knew from the birth certificate and what my adoptive parents had told me, almost nothing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that their firm had been conducting a review of an old estate. During that review, my name had appeared in connection with some adoption records from the mid-1970s. My heart knocked once against my ribs. I asked what estate she meant. She said it would be better to explain in person with documents. She used the words complex, historic, and potential rights. She did not say much else, but her voice carried a weight that made the air feel thicker. I asked if this had anything to do with the word Blaine I had seen on some old papers. There was a pause again. Then she confirmed that the name was connected. She said she would like to show me the relevant material and answer my questions. She suggested a time later that week. I wrote it down. Before we hung up, she said one more thing. She said that, from what they had already found, there was reason to believe that my placement with my adoptive family had not been as ordinary as it seemed. She said they had old records that described my arrival as surrounded by unusual circumstances. The words sat between us through the phone line. I ended the call and stood there in the parking lot, the sound of engines and machinery around me like distant waves. For a long moment, I did not move. Then I went back inside and finished my shift like any other day. I stacked boxes, checked measurements, and answered questions. Nobody at the plant knew that my whole life had just been given a new, strange shape. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed again. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I recognized the style. It was short and formal. It said, "Mr. Hale, this is Harriet Boyd. Please come to our office at the scheduled time. This matter is time sensitive." The law firm's building did not look like a place where my life would change. It was a glass tower downtown, the kind that reflects the sky and makes everything around it look smaller. The lobby was full of stone and soft lighting. People in suits walked past me with calm, quick steps. I felt underdressed in my clean but old jacket. At the front desk, I gave my name. The receptionist smiled in a polite way and said someone would be down for me. I sat on a leather chair and watched the elevators. A man in a blue suit glanced at me, then at the clipboard in his hand, then moved on. My fingers tapped against my knee, but I kept my face still. A few minutes later, a woman in a dark gray suit came toward me. She was in her early 60s, with short silver hair and clear eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She introduced herself as Harriet Boyd. Her handshake was firm, not too long, not too short. She said she was glad I had come. Her voice was steady, the way some teachers sound when they explain difficult material to a class. We went up in a quiet elevator to a high floor. The hallway was lined with framed photos of people shaking hands in front of buildings and conference tables. Names of companies and foundations I had heard on the news were printed underneath. None of this looked like my world. Harriet led me into a conference room with a long table and a wall of windows. The city stretched out below. On the table, there was a neat stack of folders and a silver jug of water with 2 glasses. She waited for me to sit, then took a seat across from me. She asked if I would like something to drink. I said water was fine. She poured it for me herself, which surprised me for some reason. She started by repeating what she had said on the phone. Her firm had been asked to conduct a review of an old estate, connected to a large industrial family that had made its money in manufacturing and shipping. She used that phrase, industrial family, instead of a name at first, as if easing me into something. Then she mentioned the name Blaine. She watched my face when she said it. I told her I had seen that word on some old adoption papers, stamped in a purple seal. She nodded slowly. That, she said, was why they had looked for me. She told me that many years ago, their firm handled legal work for the Blaine family. Recent events had made it necessary to look again at some past decisions. During that process, they had found documents about an infant placed for adoption under conditions that did not match the usual procedures. My name, the date, and the agency lined up with those records. She chose her words carefully. She said there were questions about whether all parties at the time had followed the rules. She said there were references in the old files to unusual circumstances surrounding my placement. She said their job now was to understand what had happened and what it meant for any legal rights that might still exist. I asked her what kind of rights she was talking about. She folded her hands and said that until their review was complete, she could only speak in general terms. She mentioned the possibility of inheritance, of recognition, of duties and claims. Then she stopped herself and said she did not want to get ahead of the evidence. She reassured me that I was not in trouble. That was the first clear sentence that felt solid. She said the focus was on the people who made decisions back then, not on me as a child. She said I was the subject of the paperwork, not the author of it. At one point, she glanced toward the door. A knock came, right on cue. Another person stepped into the room. He was a man in his mid-50s, wearing a simple jacket instead of a suit. He had a worn leather folder under his arm and the tired eyes of someone who has read too many reports. Harriet introduced him as Daniel Rusk. She explained that he had done investigative work for their firm in the past and that he knew some of the history around the Blaine matters. Daniel shook my hand and gave me a small, searching look, like he was measuring something in my face. Harriet asked if I was comfortable with him being present. I said yes. I did not know what I was supposed to say otherwise. Daniel said he remembered seeing the name of the adoption agency on some old documents many years back. He said it had always looked a little odd to him, because the agency closed suddenly not long after my birth year. There were whispers, he added, about certain private arrangements that did not match the official records. He was careful, too. He did not accuse anyone directly. Instead, he talked about patterns, about how, in that era, wealthy families sometimes handled inconvenient situations through quiet channels, child placements, private agreements, payments labeled as donations. Harriet stopped him with a small gesture and reminded him that they needed to stick to what could be proven. The rest, she said, would be speculation until they completed their review. I sat there with my hands on my knees and listened to people talk about my life in the calm, professional tone used for case files. It was strange. At the same time, it felt less painful than the way my parents talked about me, because at least these two people were interested in facts. Harriet said they would need my cooperation. She asked if I would be willing to share any documents I had, like the birth certificate copy, agency brochure, or anything else my parents had given me. She also mentioned medical records, if available. She said very clearly that any step we took would be documented and lawful. I told her I would bring what I had. She slid a single manila folder across the table toward me. Inside was a short form for consent, she said. It would allow their firm to request certain records on my behalf. She explained each part in simple terms and told me I could take it home to read before signing. I did not take it home. I read it slowly right there, line by line, then signed it with the pen she provided. She watched my face again, not like she doubted me, but like she knew this was not a small thing. When we finished, she stood up and said they would be in touch soon. Daniel nodded to me and said quietly that some questions take a long time to ask, but even longer not to ask. Then he left, carrying his worn folder. As Harriet walked me back to the elevator, she said one last thing. She said that whatever came from this, I had the right to know what was written about me and why. She used that exact phrase, the right to know. It was strange hearing that said out loud. Back outside, the city looked the same. Cars moved. People rushed past with coffees. The glass tower behind me reflected the clouds. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and thought about how far that world felt from my parents' dining room. 2 days later, I went to the county records office on my lunch break. The building was older than the law firm tower. The hallways smelled like paper, dust, and cleaning solution. There were metal chairs and posters about property taxes. I took a number and waited while a clerk behind the glass window called people up one by one. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and told the clerk I wanted to see any public records related to my adoption. The clerk, an older woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, asked for my name and birth year. She typed slowly, lips moving as she read the screen. After a few minutes, she frowned slightly. She said there were only very limited public entries, mostly just references to sealed files. She explained that some adoptions from that time were sealed by court order and that accessing the full records would require legal requests. Then she paused and said it looked like such a request had already been made recently by a law firm. I knew which one. I thanked her, took a printout she offered with some numbers and dates, and left. Standing on the steps outside, I felt the same sensation as at the law firm, like a shape was forming just out of sight. Enough lines were drawn now that I could almost see it, but not clearly, not yet. A week later, my parents held their 50th wedding anniversary celebration. They rented a banquet hall at a hotel across town. The room was large, with round tables covered in white cloth and gold chairs. There were flowers in tall vases and strings of soft lights along the ceiling. A band played old songs in the corner. When I arrived, my mother greeted me at the door with a quick hug. She looked tired but pleased, dressed in a pale suit she only wore for special events. My father stood nearby shaking hands with guests, making jokes about surviving 50 years of marriage. Connor and Laura moved through the crowd like hosts at a business event. Connor wore a dark suit and a smile that showed just enough teeth. Laura had on a dress that matched the decorations as if she had planned it that way. They introduced their children to everyone who would listen as the next Heir generation. I found my place at a table near the back. My name was on a small printed card. Connor and Laura were at a table closer to the front, with their families and my parents. From my seat, I could see them clearly but could not hear all their words over the music. During the meal, a slideshow of old photos played on a screen at the front of the room. It showed my parents when they were young, their first house, vacations, Laura and Connor as children. I saw 2 or 3 images where I appeared at the edge of the frame, a little older than the others, holding a toy or standing in the background. My name was not mentioned when the photos came up. The captions said things like family trip and kids at the lake. When the meal ended, my father stood up and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about marriage, about faith, about building a life. He spoke about his pride in his children. He gestured toward Connor and Laura and spoke about their careers and their families. He talked about watching their children grow and knowing that the family legacy was secure. He did not look in my direction. He did not mention my name. People clapped. Connor stood and gave a short speech about his parents as role models. Laura followed with a softer one about their mother's kindness and their father's strength. At one point, she said she hoped to give her children what her parents had given her, a strong home to inherit, both in values and in bricks. The word inherit hung in the air. When the speeches ended, the band started playing again. A photographer moved through the room, snapping pictures of guests. After a while, someone announced that they would take a family photo on the small stage near the front. My mother and father went up first. Connor and Laura joined them with their spouses and children. The photographer adjusted his camera and beckoned for them to move closer together. I stood up from my chair out of habit, then stopped. No one called my name. The photographer looked around the room and asked if everyone was ready. My mother glanced in my direction for a second, then turned her head back to the group and fixed her smile. Connor said something that made the kids laugh. The photographer counted down from 3. The flash went off. I stood beside my table and watched my family pose without me in front of a room full of people. I wondered if any of the guests noticed that one son was sitting alone. Maybe they thought I was a cousin or a friend of the family. Maybe they did not think about me at all. Later, when the formal photos were finished, my mother came over to my table. She sat down slowly, like her feet hurt. She thanked me for coming, for being there for them. Her voice was soft, almost kind. Then she said something that made the air between us go cold. She said I should remember how lucky I was that they had taken me in. I did not answer my mother. She sat there at the anniversary table with her hands folded, looking at me with that same tired, patient look she always used when she thought I was being too sensitive. Remember how lucky you were. The words echoed in my head like someone had dropped a stone down a well. I stood up slowly and told her I needed some air. She nodded and said not to disappear before the cake. I walked out of the banquet hall and into the hotel corridor. The noise of the party faded behind me. The carpet was soft under my shoes. On the wall, there were framed pictures of smiling couples who had rented the same room for weddings and events. In one of the frames, a large family posed on the same little stage my parents had just used. Parents, children, grandparents. Everyone squeezed in. No empty spaces. I stared at that photo for a long moment and then looked away. In the bathroom, I washed my hands, even though they were already clean. I watched the water run over my fingers and thought about the file in my office drawer, about the purple seal with the word Blaine, about Harriet's voice saying unusual circumstances. Lucky. It was the first time I admitted to myself that my parents and I might not be on the same side at all. I stayed at the party until the end. I cut the cake when my mother asked. I helped load gifts into my brother's car. I listened to people say how beautiful the evening had been. On the way out, my father clapped me on the shoulder and said I had always been good support staff. He smiled like that was a compliment. When I got home, I went straight to the office. I did not turn on the kitchen light. I went down the hall in the dim glow from the street lamp outside. In the office, I flipped on the lamp and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The adoption records, 1974 folder, and the old envelope lay side by side. I placed them on the desk and sat down. For the first time, I did not just glance at them and put them away. I opened both and laid every piece of paper out in a careful line. Birth certificate copy, hospital card, agency brochure, the purple seal, notes about agreements, references to a trust I could not yet see, the adoption agency's name. The word Blaine, printed in different places, never fully explained. Next to those, I set the printout from the county records office with its list of numbers and dates. Then I opened a drawer and took out something I had almost forgotten. 6 months earlier, shortly after my 49th birthday, I had ordered a DNA test kit from one of those genealogy companies. I had done it on a quiet night when the house felt too small and my thoughts felt too loud. I wanted to know where I came from in a way my parents could not or would not tell me. I had spat into a tube, sealed the package, and mailed it. When the results came back online, I looked at the map of percentages and the list of distant cousins. It felt interesting, but not shocking. I closed the page and did not think much more about it. Now I realized that was around the time the law firm first tried to reach me. I opened my email and searched for the company's name. There it was. A message from months ago saying a third party had requested contact with me through the site related to a family legal matter. I had deleted it then, thinking it was some marketing trick. I stared at that old email and felt a slow understanding settle in. My test had not been just a private curiosity, it had been a door. Somebody on the other side had opened it. I printed the email and added it to the line of papers on the desk. The collection looked small, considering what it all meant. A few sheets of paper, one old brochure, a printed email. But together they were a record of how I had arrived in a house where I was always lucky to be taken in, and why a law firm in a glass tower cared about me now. I did not know what the end of this would look like, but I knew one thing clearly for the first time. I was done letting other people decide where I belonged without ever asking me. I took a clean sheet of paper and wrote a list down the left side. Dates I knew, birth year, adoption year. Year my parents told me I was adopted. Year they announced the will change. The time I sent my DNA kit, the day of Harriet's first call, the anniversary party. Next to some of those dates, I wrote small notes. Will updated. Estate to C+L. DNA test. Law firm review. A pattern started to appear, like a drawing coming into focus. I put everything back into the folder in order, then slipped the folder and the envelope into a plain bag. I set it by the door. In the morning, I would take it downtown. 2 days later, I stood again in the elevator at Harriet's building, the bag in my hand. This time she met me not in the big conference room, but in a smaller one with a round table. Daniel was there already, flipping through some pages. He greeted me with a small nod. I set the bag on the table and slid it toward Harriet. I told her it held everything I had related to my adoption, including a printout about the DNA test. She emptied the bag carefully, spreading the papers out in neat rows like I had done at home. She looked at each item with the focused attention of someone reading a coded message. Daniel leaned over her shoulder from time to time, murmuring short comments, pointing at dates or names. They did not explain everything they saw. They did not name every law or rule, but I could tell from their faces when something confirmed what they already suspected. At one point, Harriet picked up the agency brochure and tapped the purple seal with her finger. She said quietly that this seal matched one they had in their archives from an old trust connected to the Blaine family. She glanced at me and said that this was helpful. That was the word she chose, but her eyes said more. She asked a few gentle questions about my life with the Hales. When did they tell me I was adopted? Had they ever mentioned anything about my original parents? Did the name Blaine mean anything to them? As far as I knew, I answered as best I could. Mostly no, mostly nothing. Harriet thanked me. She said they were close to finishing their review, that soon they would need to gather all relevant parties in one place to present their findings. She looked at me when she said relevant parties, then looked away toward the papers again. I asked what that meant. She said that certain old agreements were tied to the presence of specific people or their descendants. The presentation, she explained, would serve two purposes: to inform everyone involved and to formally record the outcome. She chose her words carefully. She did not say what the outcome would be. Before I left, Harriet handed me a slim, sealed envelope with the firm's logo on it. She said it contained details about an upcoming event connected to the estate review. She told me to read it at home and to follow the instructions inside. She said the event would be public in one sense and private in another. On my way out, Daniel walked with me to the elevator. He said in a low voice that he had seen many families handle their secrets badly over the years. He said the law could not fix feelings, but it could at least put facts in the right places. Then he told me something I did not expect. He said that years ago, when he had first seen the old file that mentioned an unnamed infant placed for adoption in 1974, he had wondered what happened to that child. He had not known it was me, of course, but now that he did, he was glad the file would not stay buried. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table with the sealed envelope from the firm. The paper was thick and smooth. My name was printed on the front. I opened it with a butter knife, carefully, as if the paper itself might break. Inside, there was a formal letter and another smaller card. I did not read the letter out loud, even in my head. I let the sentences slide over me in silence. It spoke of a legacy recognition ceremony for the Blaine family and associated parties. It named a date and a time. It listed a hotel I recognized, one of the largest in the city, with ballrooms used for corporate events and charity galas. The smaller card was an invitation pass with my name on it. Below my name was a simple phrase, "By request of the estate." I ran my thumb over those words. Then I placed the card back in the envelope and set it on the table. I did not tell my parents about it. I did not share it with Connor or Laura. For once, there was a large thing in my life that was mine alone to carry. The days leading up to the ceremony moved in 2 layers. On the surface, life went on as usual. I went to work. I fixed minor issues on the plant floor. I listened to coworkers complain about management and football scores. At home, I cooked simple meals, took walks in the park, paid bills. Underneath, my mind traced the shape of what was coming. I found myself standing in front of the mirror more often, looking for something I could not name. I noticed the line of my jaw, the angle of my nose. I thought about the portrait Harriet had mentioned once, of Henry Blaine, hanging in a corporate building downtown. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. On my next day off, I went to the Blaine Industries Corporate Museum. It was open to the public, a visitor center attached to their main headquarters across town. Inside, there were displays of old machines, model ships, photos of factories and workers from past decades. School groups moved through the space, following guides who pointed out important items. I walked alone. In one corner, there was a section about the company's founder. A large black and white photograph showed a man in his late 50s standing in front of the first factory. He wore a suit and a serious expression. Underneath, the plaque read, "Henry Alistair Blaine, founder." I stood in front of that photograph for a long time. I looked at the eyes, the chin, the way his mouth rested in a straight line when he was not smiling. I did not think, "This is my father." I did not let myself say that. I only thought, I recognized something here. Next to the big portrait, there were smaller frames. Henry shaking hands with officials, Henry at a shipyard, Henry at a desk, signing papers. In one, he was younger, holding a cigar in one hand and a glass in the other, laughing at something out of frame. He looked alive in that one, not frozen for history. Further along, there was a photo of Henry with a woman identified as his wife, Ruth. The plaque mentioned that they had no surviving children. The word surviving did something to my chest. I moved on before my thoughts could go too far. On the way out, I stopped at the small gift shop. They sold books about the company history, pens with the Blaine logo, and postcards of the founder's portrait. I picked up one of the postcards and turned it over. The back was blank. I bought it and slid it into my pocket. 2 nights before the ceremony, my parents invited me to a casual dinner. I went because not going would raise questions I did not want to answer yet. We ate stew at the familiar table. Connor dropped by halfway through to talk about some renovation idea for the house. He joked that he was already planning future improvements for when the place is his problem. Laura sent a video message from a vacation with her family, raising a glass to my parents and saying how grateful she was for everything you've set up for us. Nobody asked me what I was doing that weekend. Nobody knew I would be in the same kind of hotel they used for their events, only this time I would not be near the back of the room. On the day of the ceremony, I took the afternoon off from work. I ironed my one good suit, the one I wore to weddings and funerals. I put the Blaine postcard in my inner pocket without quite knowing why. Then I took the invitation card from the law firm envelope and slipped it into my wallet. The hotel was downtown, near the river. Inside, the lobby was crowded with people in suits and dresses. There were signs pointing toward different ballrooms, conferences, charity auctions, company meetings. One sign had the Blaine Industries logo and the words "Private Event." I followed it down a hallway lined with mirrors and soft lights. At the end, 2 staff members stood by a pair of tall double doors, checking names against a list. I gave mine. One of them glanced down at the paper, then up at me, and nodded. She opened the door and stepped aside. As I walked past her, into the bright noise of the ballroom, I noticed something. Several people already inside were holding their phones up, screens glowing as if they were getting ready to record whatever was about to happen. The doors closed softly behind me. The ballroom felt too bright at first. There were rows of chairs facing a low stage, and people stood in small groups, speaking in quiet voices. At the front, a banner carried the Blaine Industries logo. A few cameras were set up near the back, their red lights already on. I scanned the room and saw Harriet near the stage talking to a man in a dark suit. She caught my eye, excused herself, and walked over. She said she was glad I had come and that we would begin shortly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes looked sharper than before. Then I saw them. On the left side of the room, near the middle row, sat my parents. My mother held her handbag with both hands, knuckles pale. My father sat stiff, jaw clenched. Connor and Laura were there too, standing beside them, dressed as if for an important meeting. They looked confused and annoyed, like people who had been dragged somewhere without a clear reason. My mother saw me and frowned, asking why I was there. I told her that I had been invited. She said the same thing, that some law firm had contacted them about my background and a possible recognition, and that they had assumed it was some kind of formal apology or scholarship event. Connor muttered that it sounded like a waste of time. Before anyone could say more, Harriet stepped onto the stage and asked everyone to take their seats. She began by explaining that this gathering was part of a legal process connected to the Blaine estate. She spoke about the late Henry and Ruth Blaine, about their company, their charitable work, and their estate plan. She said that for many years it had been believed the Blaines died without surviving children. Then she said that recent evidence proved this belief was wrong. She turned slightly and said my full name. She stated very clearly that independent DNA testing, historic medical records, and archived legal documents confirmed I was the biological son of Henry Blaine, born in 1974 and placed for adoption under irregular conditions. A murmur moved through the room. Harriet went on. She said that the old files described my placement as surrounded by unusual circumstances, including a private arrangement made without the knowledge of Henry himself. She said that after his death, a trust clause had remained dormant, written to activate only if a direct biological child was ever identified. Then she read out that clause. It said that if such a child was confirmed, primary control of certain assets, voting shares, and legacy decisions would pass to that child. It also said that anyone who had knowingly obstructed honest contact between that child and their origin would be barred from receiving any benefit tied to the estate. Harriet turned toward my parents' row. She stated, in that same calm voice, that records from the adoption agency and banking ledgers from that year showed my adoptive parents had accepted compensation from an intermediary acting on behalf of Ruth Blaine. She said the documents also showed that they had agreed in writing to disclose my origins to me upon adulthood and to cooperate with any future contact. She let that hang in the air. My mother covered her mouth with her hand. My father said something under his breath that I did not catch. Connor whispered that this had to be a mistake. Laura shook her head and stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Harriet continued. She said that I was now recognized in full legal terms as the rightful heir named in that dormant clause. She listed what that meant: controlling interest in the trust, a seat on the foundation board, and final say over how the Blaine legacy would proceed. She added that any prior assumptions about there being no surviving children were now officially corrected in the record. Someone near the front asked what this meant for existing relatives who had been expecting a share. Harriet answered that some arrangements would be adjusted, that some benefits would end, and that some would be redirected. She said the details would follow in private meetings, but that this public acknowledgement was required as part of the process. Then she looked directly at me and asked if I wished to say anything for the record. I stood up. My hands were steady. I said that for most of my life I had been treated as a guest in my own family, that I had been called lucky to be taken in while being written out of every future plan. I said I understood now that there had been another story running under that one, written in old ink and hidden in drawers. I added that whatever decisions I made next would be based on the documents and on what was fair, not on the people who had spent years reminding me I did not really belong. My voice did not shake. When I sat down, the room was silent for a moment. Cameras still pointed forward. My parents stared at me with expressions I could not read. Connor looked like someone had just pulled a rug out from under him. Laura held her phone but did not lift it. Harriet thanked everyone for attending and said the formal session was concluded. People began to stand, talking in low voices. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, but I did not take it out. I walked out of the ballroom, through the open doors, and into the quieter light of the hallway. In the reflection of a gold-framed mirror, I saw myself in the suit, the invitation card still in my pocket. For the first time, the man looking back did not seem like an extra at his own table. Behind me, the doors closed with a soft, final click.